Hello and good morning from Cali, the beautiful city of Cali in Colombia, where it is currently 11 in the morning on the third day of the negotiations at COP16, the 16th Conference of the Parties to the UN Biodiversity Convention. And we're here as the Wildlife Trust, both to see and understand what's going on at these negotiations, but in particular to talk about how they're relevant to the UK and what the UK needs to do to make sure we're delivering on our commitments under the Global Biodiversity Framework, which was enthusiastically signed up to by the UK government 2 years ago at the Montreal meeting, and which the new Labour government have enthusiastically said they want to make sure they implement as well. So during all these broadcasts from COP16, from the Wildlife Trust, we're going to be looking at that Global Biodiversity Framework and what these talks mean for the UK and for nature in the UK. And today, a particular focus on marine conservation, you'll be delighted to know. But first of all, let me just give you an update about some of the things that have been happening in the negotiations. And no big surprise in these first few days, as often happens at these big UN meetings, there's a big debate about the money. How can we actually mobilize the financing that's needed to deliver on the commitments, in this case, in the Global Biodiversity Framework? And 2 years ago, when that was all agreed in Montreal, there was a commitment to try and get 20 billion of funding mobilized from the rich countries, the global north as it's often called, by 2025, and a commitment to then ramp that up to 50 billion dollars, that is US dollars, in funding nature restoration around the world by 2030. But sadly, as so often happens, some of those commitments haven't yet been delivered. And the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund actually at the moment only has a quarter of a billion, 250 million US dollars in it so far. So there's a huge job to do to try and mobilize a lot more money, particularly from the rich countries, to make sure we're implementing the Global Biodiversity Framework. And there's a bit of a debate going on at the moment in the negotiations between countries that are saying that they would prefer to use some of the existing frameworks. And at the moment, that fund for Global Biodiversity Framework is being implemented through what's called the Global Environmental Facility, which has been around for many years. But there's some countries, notably Brazil and others, are saying they're not happy with that, and they want a separate new fund specifically developed for and administered differently for the funding for nature recovery, specifically focused on delivering on the Global Biodiversity Framework. So it's quite familiar territory that these UN meetings start off and with a big debate about the money. And that is often in the warm-up to all the sort of ministers arriving, which they start doing towards the end of this week. UK ministers, particularly here early next week, when you get a high-level segment. And that's when the politicians really get involved, sort of take over a little bit from the officials to do the political deals that are needed to move things forward. And I think as a Wildlife Trust, we would say, we always know the case is that often unlocking progress in these kind of talks, it's essential really for the rich countries to put some money on the table to unlock progress. So we would really urge the UK government to look at how they can increase some of the funding that they're providing to the Global Biodiversity Framework to unlock that progress and to enable things to happen. So that just gives you a hint of one of the many, many topics that's being discussed here in Cali at the moment during the negotiations. But there's so much else going on. And as always the case with these COPs, you have the official negotiations taking place and many levels and many streams of negotiations taking place there. But then you also have all the kind of more unofficial things that are happening around the COP, but some of them very, very impressive as well. And new commitments, voluntary commitments being made, which can be quite powerful in their own right as well. And as we explained yesterday, you have the blue zone, which is where the official negotiations take place. And you have the green zone, which is much more open to people. Anyone can go in it, particularly local communities, people, local residents can go in and see what's happening. And yesterday, Rob Stoneman and myself went and had a look at the green zone, didn't we, Rob? How was it?
And Rob, yeah, we certainly did, Craig. I mean, I'm in the blue zone today, and I'm in a very noisy IECN tent. We've been singing in the rain in the blue zone. It's been pouring down all morning, but we were walking on sunshine yesterday in the green zone. It was really quite an impressive set of activities. As Craig said, the green zone is where actually local people, normal people that don't have the observer status that we do as NGOs, can get involved in the jamboree that is the COP. And COP is sort of in three parts. You've got the official negotiations, you've got all the side events in the blue zone where I am now, and then the green zone where everybody can get involved. So absolutely fantastic. It was a bit, I mean, the green zone was really interesting. It was a bit like a kind of massive Christmas market, and we've got some pictures in the background here. So lots and lots of fantastic shops and things like that, and then these brilliant displays. So the Colombians have put a lot of effort into this, and the great thing is, there's a huge level of interest from local people coming to the green zone. So really lovely stuff, and we went to a particularly brilliant display that's being shown here, which was sets of animals on screens talking at us about the fantastic wildlife that you get in Colombia. And Colombia really is one of the most biodiverse nations on the planet. It has this immense altitudinal range because of the Andes Mountains that run through the heart of Colombia. So you can go anywhere from the really steamy, biodiverse jungles of the Amazon, and Colombian rainforest actually sits on the Amazon, is in the Amazon basin. So all the way up, and all the way up to the Paramo, which I had the good fortune to visit about 6 years ago. These incredible peatlands and grasslands, very, very high up, so high you can barely breathe. And then, of course, two fantastic coastlines. So the Colombia has both the Caribbean coast and the Pacific coast. So we've got the Atlantic Ocean on one side and the Pacific Ocean on the other side. But of course, it's not just Colombia that has fantastic marine riches, other places too, not least the British Isles, our own British Isles. And Ruth's going to tell us a little bit about the wonderful wildlife that we.
Hi, Rob. Hi, Craig. Hi, everybody. Yes, yeah. We may not have the warmth of Colombia, but our UK seas are just as incredibly rich. We've got half of our UK species within our marine environments and in our seas. And yeah, we've got a huge amount of different varieties, and that's really because of our geography. So we sit out into the western approaches into the Atlantic Ocean. So we get the Gulf Stream bringing up those lovely warm waters and the upwellings. So we may get some stormy weather and some big waves, but that encourages all of those nutrients to come around our island nation, and that feeds a lot of our marine wildlife and everything else. So we get, the megafauna, the dolphins, the whales, the sharks. We get leatherback turtles that are resident around here eating a lot of our jellyfish. We get some incredible big marine life, but we also get some amazing small stuff. So the disco sea slugs that are hugely multicolored. We've got our very own corals, the pink sea fans, which grow on some of our reefs. And whilst we don't have the coral reefs of the tropics, we've got cold water reefs, which are just as diverse and just as dynamic and incredible to see. Huge vertical walls of sea anemones. We have incredibly rare chalk reefs, things like the Cromer Shoals chalk reefs, which are one of a kind and incredibly diverse as well. We've got ancient, incredibly slow growing habitats like merle, which are a bobbly 3D very slow growing seaweeds, which are home to all sorts of other interstitial animals and food for all sorts of commercial fish species and other things. So we've got a vast amount of marine wildlife around our shores. Incredibly beautiful, and we're incredibly lucky to be able to see and enjoy it if we go out to our shores and out to the coastline.
Great, Ruth, thank you so much, and it is absolutely amazing. Just the marine biodiversity we have around the UK. It's often said that around half our biodiversity in the UK is found in our marine environment, but sometimes, sadly, out of sight is also out of mind, and that really reminds us of just the huge efforts that are needed to restore nature in the marine environment in the UK. And Ruth, in the global biodiversity framework, there are all sorts of targets that relate to this. The famous one, when we talk about 30 by 30, getting 30% of our land and sea, crucially, sea in recovery for nature by 2030 is very much in there. But also things like Target 10 in the global biodiversity framework is about making sure that agriculture and aquaculture fisheries and forests are sustainably managed. So there's an awful lot to do to trying to get us into that. And we can see some of this beautiful marine biodiversity from the UK here now, that some of the things you're talking about. I love that discussion of the disco sea slugs, Ruth, absolutely fantastic. But Ruth, tell us more. What would you say are the issues then that are affecting our beautiful marine biodiversity in the UK, and what are the key interventions needed from government, from policymakers, to put nature in recovery in the marine environment around the UK?
We've still got huge threats to our marine environment, things like fisheries and fishing impacts, particularly bottom-towed gear, things like pollution, things like some of our offshore development that needs to be better managed. And we have got systems in place, but those systems aren't running as effectively as they should be. So we've got marine protected areas. We have a network which should be achieving our 30 by 30, but they're not effectively managed at the moment. They're managed for features, and that means that only those features that are designated are effectively managed from those impacting activities. So they're not properly protected as such, and we've got to increase that. We've got to look at our marine protected as whole systems and take that whole system approach to management. Bottom tow trawling and dredging is highly impactful, both to biodiversity, but also to our blue carbon stores. We've just led and been partners in a world first report mapping and assessing the value and the amount of blue carbon that we've got stored around the UK coasts. 244 million tonnes in just the top 10 centimetres of our seabed sediments. But those
it's a huge amount. We should recognise absolutely huge amount of carbon that is there in our marine environment. And people often talk about forests, for example. We often talk about peat bogs as well, and rightly so. They're so important. But that's a vast amount of carbon stored in our marine environment that is under threat if we disturb it and dig it up. Actually, that carbon gets released.
Exactly. Yeah. And when it is released, then that's going against all of our climate targets. So it's by protecting our marine protected areas, we are not only protecting the biodiversity that's within them, but also those carbon stores as well, because they are impacted by that same bottom-towed trawling gear, but also by offshore developments that are in the wrong places. And things like the cabling, the infrastructure will have impacts on those sediments as well as the biodiversity within those marine protected areas. So we've got to change the way that we're managing our marine protected areas, but also looking at designating some new highly protected marine areas. We've only got 3 at the moment, and they're very, very small. And we've got to, these essentially highly protected areas could have massive potential to really boost our 30 by 30 credentials.
Yeah, so at the moment we talk about, with respect to 30 by 30, I think we say that we're roughly around 4% of our land in a good state for nature in England, and I think we talk around 8% of our marine environment is in these marine protected areas. But what you're saying is, a lot of these are paper parks. They're not really properly protected. We've had comments in from Douglas, who's watching today, saying before we had highly protected marine areas, we need to actually protect the current ones in name only in protected areas. Exactly this point, saying that in Scotland the P in MPAs is silent and invisible. They're really just marine areas. A very good way of putting it, Douglas. And lots of other comments in the chat. We see people joining us today from London, from Weymouth, from Belgium. Thank you very much for joining and letting us know where you're from. It's fabulous. But Ruth, what does it mean then? What would it look like to have a good marine protected area? What would that actually look like?
We are making progress. So we're increasing slowly, but only 9.5% of our marine protected areas are effectively managed. And we need to get the legislation in place to ban this bottom-towed gear from those marine protected areas. We wouldn't allow our peat bogs to be ploughed up. It seems crazy to allow our marine nature reserves at sea to be dredged in a similar way. So that would go a huge way. In terms of development, we need better marine spatial planning to ensure that are the huge increase in offshore wind development, for example, the government's mission to try and deliver this clean power over the next decade or two. That's got to be done in light of in a nature positive way, and not trying to have a win for climate at the expense of biodiversity. So we've got to have a better marine spatial plan where we can protect those seabed and biodiversity habitats as well.
Okay, good. Yeah, and this is absolutely crucial, isn't it? Of course, we want to go to renewable energy because we've got to tackle the climate crisis, but it's got to be done in a nature positive way. And actually, if you we were talking about all that carbon locked up in those marine sediments, actually, if we try and build offshore wind and so on in a way that then opens up those sediments, actually will release carbon, and that is obviously not what you want. So real care is needed to make sure that we develop our renewable energy in a nature positive way. All right, Ruth, thank you so much. There's been it's so great to be able to talk a little bit about marine today. I was going to go back to Rob in the blue zone, but I think he's lost his connection, unfortunately. So really, that's all we've got time for. I want to say thank you so much for joining today. Make sure you join us 5 o'clock UK time every day for these brief updates from Cali, from COP16 in Cali. If you want to find out more, of course, you can also sign up to for our daily updates, which you can see the QR code on the screen now to do that, and follow us for the next couple of weeks as we navigate you through what's happening at COP16 in Colombia, and crucially, what it means for the UK as well. But we mustn't forget in all of that the huge importance of our marine environment, and how, as the UK, we have so much that we can be doing around restoring our beautiful marine biodiversity. That's around the British Isles. And then, of course, you also have the fact that the UK has its overseas territories, which include some of the most spectacular marine biodiversity anywhere in the world. So keep tuning in 5 o'clock every day, or watch us on Catch Up as a Wildlife Trust. We'll keep you informed what's happening here and what it means to the UK. Thanks so much for joining today. Goodbye.